So the thing I'm most excited for above everything else for Borderlands 4 is the new skill trees and Vault Hunter customization, because these are not only going to be the biggest skill trees by far, but they're adding in a lot of new systems tied to the action skill you're using and just giving you a ton of new ways to use your action skills, to modify your action skills, and to create the playstyles and build you want to create. So in this video, I want to go over all of the small details and completely explain every piece of information we have for these skill trees for Borderlands 4. Now keep in mind, we've only been shown specific information on 2 skill trees for Vex, who is the Siren of Borderlands 4. So some of this information could be slightly changed between skill trees or between Vault Hunters, but based upon every previous Borderlands game, a majority of this stuff will be very similar between all of the Vault Hunters with just small changes. And then obviously all the nodes you get to choose between will be different, but the general layout and kind of a base information of the system should be very similar, if not the same. And then like the previous Borderlands games, we have 3 different skill trees, but similar to Borderlands 3, every one of those skill trees has an action skill tied to it, but you're just able to slot whichever action skill you want, and you can still put points into every single one of the skill trees at the same time if you want to. And they actually created this new slotting system you'll see on the left side where you can freely slot any of the action skills. They don't cost any points. Then you can slot in the new augments. Those don't cost any points. And then you can slot in the new capstones. Those don't cost any points. So let's just use the example of the red skill tree for Vex, and the action skill is Trouble. You essentially create this big summon that's always with you and has an activatable that heals them and just turns them into a badass and buffs them up a bunch. And that is your action skill. Then as you start putting points into your skill tree, you get to rows that have augments. Now augments are free. You just need to get to that row to unlock them. And any of the things slottable for your action skills you can change anytime you want, so you don't have to go respec to change those. And the first slottable thing outside of the action skill are augments. These are essentially a secondary activatable skill that ties into your main skill. So for Trouble here, one of the first augments you can choose is Blind Strike, which you press and hold the keybind to normally use your action skill, and it commands Trouble to blink strike an enemy target dealing damage, and that blink strike will always be a critical strike against enemies below 50% health. So it does damage, has a cooldown. It's kind of this secondary effect, essentially a second action skill. It just ties into your first one and isn't going to be as strong. And then as you continue to progress and get to the final row of your skill trees, you unlock your capstones, which are the third slottable item that ties back into your action skills. So for example, for Trouble, you can get this Trouble Bubble capstone. Trouble now gains overshield whenever he deals damage, and while Phase Familiar is active, which is your activatable skill for Trouble, Trouble gains an elemental aura dealing ordnance damage to enemies nearby, so it just deals AoE damage and gets a passive that any damage Trouble is dealing, they get an overshield. So these capstones seem incredibly strong, and it seems like you have your action skill, which is an activatable, your augment, which is a secondary activatable, and then your capstone, which all seem to be passive. And those are your 3 different slottables that tie into your action skills and the different ways you can actually use that. And remember, your action skills, your augments, and your capstones are all free. You just have to get to the row they're on and you unlock them, and you can freely change those anytime you want without having to go back to respec all of the points in your skill trees. But that brings us to the more specific information of these skill trees, and I went through and added up all these numbers, how many nodes there are, how many points you can spend, so we're going to go over all of that information now. But first we have to go over how the layout of these skill trees actually works. So as you'll see, there's a top bigger box that has 3 different rows of a bunch of different nodes, and there are 2 augments on the middle row, and then as you progress that and get past the final row, there's then 3 separate boxes at the bottom that all also have some augments, capstones, and a bunch of nodes in them. And how this is progressed is actually a bit unique. So at the top, just putting in enough points will unlock you the next row. It's 5 points like every previous Borderlands game. So in the first row, you put in 5 points in any mixture of any of the first row nodes. Then you'll unlock the second row, which will for free give you both the augments of that row. Then you need 5 more points anywhere to unlock the third row, and that'll fully unlock you the top tree. But then in the final row of the top box, if you put 5 points into that, that will unlock you the start of all 3 of the bottom boxes. It may look like it requires you to put points in specific nodes, but that's not actually the case. It's just 5 points anywhere in that bottom row unlocks you the first row of the 3 bottom boxes. Now the 3 bottom boxes on that first row also have another augment in each box, and those will be unlocked for free. But it actually changes up from this point, because after you have the first row of all 3 bottom boxes unlocked, you now start to progress each one of those bottom boxes separately. So let's say I go put 5 points into the rightmost bottom box, that first row. It'll unlock me the second row of that rightmost box, but it will not unlock me anything for the other 2 boxes. So for these 3 bottom boxes after the first row, they're progressed separately, but they're still progressed in the same way. You put 5 points in the first row, unlocks the second row, 5 points again, and it unlocks a third row, which will also unlock you the capstone passive for that specific box, which again is free just when you unlock that final row, and then you can slot in that capstone as your final slottable. So it's a mix of being very similar to previous Borderlands games with a few new additions added in. Now let's go over some numbers for all of these different nodes, all the points, how many nodes there are, because they actually are a bit different between the 2 skill trees we got to take a look at, because we got to take a look at the green and the red skill trees for Vex. And while these are a little bit different in terms of how many points you can put into them, this is probably going to be very similar to all of the other skill trees for all of the other Vault Hunters. Slight point differences, but how many nodes there are is probably going to be the same. So looking at the green skill tree, the top bigger box has 11 different nodes and 2 augments. Again, the augments are free when you get to that row. And there's 51 total points in that top box. So if you filled out every node of that top box, that's 51 total points you would need. But then comparing that to the red tree, there's again 11 nodes and 2 augments that are free, but there's only 49 points in the top tree of the red box. So slight point differences, but same amount of nodes, same amount of augments. But then when we get to the 3 bottom boxes, the amount of things they have in them are uniform across these 2 skill trees. So in both the green and the red skill trees, there are 6 nodes in each bottom box, and then there's 1 augment and 1 capstone per box as well. And again, the capstone and augments are free once you get to them. So 6 total nodes you can put points in every single one of the boxes we've seen, but the amount of points in those boxes are different. So in the green tree, box 1 going from left to right is 28 points, box 2 is 24 points, and box 3 is 26 points. In the red tree going from left to right, box 1 is 28, box 2 is 26, box 3 is 30. So slight point differences, but same amount of nodes and everything else. And it does also seem that in one of the bottom boxes there is a node that only costs 1 point. So based upon that, it does also seem like there are actually going to be some stronger nodes within these bottom boxes, because usually in every Borderlands game, any node that's a 1 out of 1 is usually something that's quite strong, usually a more unique or significant effect. Also, on a side note, between both of these skill trees we got to see, there's only 1 node that connected to another node. So in a lot of previous Borderlands games, you would have 1 node and then a line to another node, where you would usually have to put all 5 points in the first node to be able to start putting points into the connected bottom node. And in the rightmost bottom box of the green skill tree, there's a 5-point node connected to a 3-point node. That is the only connecting nodes in either of the skill trees we've seen. So it seems like these connecting nodes are a possibility, but not super common. So based upon all the information we just went over, the green tree in total has 129 points, and the red tree has a total of 133 points. So some slight point differences in where they actually are, but most things are very similar. In specific, the amount of augments, capstones, and nodes seem to be the exact same. It's just a little bit different how many points all of those nodes actually have available. Now, this does actually ask the question of how many points are we actually going to be obtaining throughout the entirety of Borderlands 4 on launch? And we actually got to look at a little bit of additional information. So first off, we know that you start at level 1 and you don't start with a skill point. So every level past level 1, you will be getting 1 point, or at least that's what we've seen up to level 25, because at level 25, they have 24 total skill points. And a lot of people are thinking the level cap might be 50, because that was true in a lot of previous Borderlands games. And there was a little part of a screenshot that people thought showed someone as level level 50, so people think they were showing the max level cap there. If that were to be the case and there weren't other ways to gain skill points, you would have 49 total skill points to work with, but that's just conjecture. We don't actually know what the level cap is. We don't know if getting higher levels gives you more skill points, and we don't know if there are other ways in the game to earn even more skill points. So keep in mind, all or none of that could be true. But it does take 25 points to get your first capstone. So to progress the first box, then to progress one of the bottom boxes and get that first capstone. And keep in mind the capstone is free, so it's only 25 points. You don't actually have to put any points in the bottom row. Now you will be able to unlock multiple capstones in the same overarching tree, but again, that's not necessarily giving you more power because you can only have one capstone slotted in at a time. And if you go down and unlock a capstone of one tree, you will be 1 point off unlocking a capstone of another tree, but that doesn't actually seem to be that useful because from everything we've seen, you won't be able to slot augments or capstones from one tree onto the action skill of another tree. So that really doesn't matter that much, but if we were only to get 49 points, that is actually pretty limiting on how many points you have to spend, especially considering you're going to have on average probably like 130 points per skill tree and you have 3 skill trees. So I'm hoping we get more than 49 points, not like some crazy amount more, but at least a chunk more of total points once we progress heavily into the end game. And then as a side note, every Vault Hunter has their own unique trait that's a passive that ties back into everything they're doing pretty heavily. And this doesn't seem to be something that's changeable. This is just kind of a base thing that every Vault Hunter has. And Vex's is that if she's holding an elemental weapon, her action skill and melee damage will change to that element. So let's say she has out a poison weapon, her action skill and melee damage change to that element. And we actually got to see this with her Summon Trouble, where she had out her cat summon, and when she would change elements of weapons, her cat would change colors to that element and start dealing that element's damage. So these traits also seem to play a pretty massive role tying back into your build and the points you're actually going to be going into. But that's pretty much all of the information we currently have for the skill trees, the action skills, and everything else tied into those for Borderlands 4. Now again, we haven't seen the skill trees for any other Vault Hunters, but they will probably all be very similar. I could see maybe in a different Vault Hunter, the augments are in different areas or something like that, but they're probably all going to be laid out in a very similar fashion. They will most likely all have the same amount of total nodes. There will just be some slight differences in how many points you can actually put in the nodes, but everything else is probably going to work in a very similar way. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.